What if your breakfast cereal and cooking oil weren't based on science, but on religious doctrine? Today, I'll show you how a 19th century church secretly rewrote global nutrition policy and how it still shapes what you eat. Hi everyone, I'm Mark Bates. I'm a metabolic health coach, and this is my video on the ideological capture of nutrition science. So let's get into it. Religious doctrine secretly controls modern nutrition science. Even today, it still does. The breakfast cereal in your pantry carries the fingerprints of 19th century religious doctrine. The vegetable oil in your kitchen cabinet serves an ideology that predates modern medicine by decades. Most people believe dietary guidelines emerge from objective scientific consensus. The reality reveals something far more disturbing. A single religious organization has systematically captured the institutions that shape global nutrition policy. Their century-long campaign transformed moral beliefs about sexual purity into medical recommendations that now govern what billions of people eat daily. So what is the institutional foundation here? The Seventh-Day Adventist Church didn't just influence nutritional science. They built it from the ground up. In 1917, Lena Cooper, an Adventist from Battle Creek Sanitarium and protege of John Harvey Kellogg, who co-founded the American Dietetic Association. This organization, now known as the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, represents the largest body of food nutrition professionals in the United States. The church's dietary ideology became embedded in the core nutrition science from day one. Early dietetic textbooks and training programs were authored by SDA adherents who promoted vegetarianism as both a moral and health imperative. The first Battle Creek Sanitarium dietitian helped establish the American Dietetic Association, which ultimately advocated a vegetarian diet. 5 years later, Loma Linda College started the first dietitian training school, further cementing Adventist influence in professional nutrition education. This wasn't accidental. The SDA Church owns and operates numerous healthcare and educational facilities, including Loma Linda University and Medical Center, which train healthcare professionals in plant-based nutrition. These institutions serve as hubs for propagating the church's dietary ideology under the guise of medical and nutritional science. From moral control to medical doctrine. The transformation from religious belief to scientific recommendation reveals the most sophisticated institutional laundering operation in modern history. Ellen G. White, the SDA prophetess, taught that meat consumption was a toxic stimulant that increased lustful feelings and sexual urges. These weren't health recommendations. They were moral imperatives designed to suppress what the church considered sinful behavior. John Harvey Kellogg, influenced by White's teachings from childhood, developed plant-based foods like cornflakes specifically to suppress sexual desire and prevent masturbation. The original goal was behavior control through dietary manipulation. Over decades, this moral framework underwent systematic secularization. The religious rationale for plant-based diets was reframed in secular terms, emphasizing supposed health benefits like reduced risk of heart disease and cancer. The original goal of suppressing sexual urges was replaced by claims about cholesterol, saturated fat, and disease prevention. But the physiological effects remained identical. Eliminating animal foods reduces cholesterol availability, which directly impacts sex hormone production, since cholesterol serves as the essential precursor for testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone synthesis. What was once openly acknowledged as libido suppression became marketed as cardiovascular protection. Oh my God. Okay, commercial integration and market control. Religious ideology aligned perfectly with commercial interests, creating a self-reinforcing system of institutional control. The SDA Church founded and continues to own major food companies, including Kellogg's and Sanitarium Foods, which is mostly a European and Australian food company, which produce and promote plant-based processed foods. Now, on the side note, while they're not owned by the Adventist Church, right? You think Post Cereals is going to do anything different from Kellogg's since they entered the market simply to try and pick up on the market that Kellogg's had built, right? Go find some documentaries on the early breakfast cereal wars, and you'll understand what I meant by that, okay? Sanitarium Health and Wellbeing operates as a wholly owned processed food company of the Seventh-Day Adventist Church, manufacturing breakfast cereals, liquid breakfasts, peanut butters, soy and almond milks, and frozen desserts. This creates a symbiotic relationship between religious ideology and commercial interests. The church promotes plant-based diets through institutional influence while simultaneously profiting from the sale of plant-based products designed to replace animal foods. These companies have historically influenced public health messaging and dietary guidelines by funding research and participating in policy discussions. The integration of religious doctrine, institutional control, and commercial profit created an unstoppable force for plant food dietary promotion. And have there been any shenanigans in the scientific side? Sure, there's evidence of suppression and scientific manipulation. The most damaging aspect of this institutional capture involves the systematic suppression of contradictory evidence. Randomized controlled trials that challenged the plant-based narrative were buried for decades. The Minnesota coronary experiment and Sydney diet health study showed increased mortality with high linoleic acid intake from vegetable oils, yet these findings were suppressed or delayed in publication, in many cases for years. The Minnesota coronary experiment revealed a 22% higher risk of death for each 30 milligrams of deciliter reduction in serum cholesterol. Interesting, right? They've been telling you for a long time, reduce your cholesterol because it's better for your heart, yet the evidence is that it actually increases your mortality risk. Okay? Despite the intervention group achieving significant cholesterol reduction compared to controls. So, in this study, right, they reduced their cholesterol and their mortality rate went higher. Compared to the control group, the intervention group had increased risk of all-cause mortality, cardiovascular mortality, and mortality from coronary heart disease. Okay? What they don't tell you is that more than half of all people who suffer heart attacks in America have low cholesterol. Makes you wonder. Okay, keep going. These weren't minor statistical variations. These were clear signals of harm from the very interventions being promoted as heart healthy. Organizations like the American Heart Association and the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute controlled the majority of funding for cardiovascular research, enabling them to influence which studies were prioritized, published, or suppressed. Researchers involved in these studies admitted to withholding or delaying publication because the results conflicted with prevailing hypotheses. Right? That's a big deal. You don't get funding if you're not playing along with what everyone else is saying. A small group of influential researchers, including Ansel Keys, that's a name you'll hear a lot, and his associates, right, in this field, dominated the field by controlling editorial boards, funding decisions, and conference agendas, right? Scientists who challenged the diet heart hypotheses or presented contradictory evidence faced marginalization, loss of funding, and professional ostracism. And we've got lots of evidence of them doing exactly that. All right, what did this do to our health? Well, it's a metabolic catastrophe, okay? Decades of following plant-based dietary guidelines have produced the opposite of their promised health benefits. Despite aggressive promotion of plant-based diets, right, Rates of obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer have increased globally, and the speed at which they hit has increased dramatically. The expected reductions in chronic diseases never materialized, suggesting that the guidelines may be ineffective or actually harmful. Right? If you want somebody to how this affects generationally, look at my video on Pottinger's cats about how you're feeding yourself can affect your children, which can affect your grandchildren. Okay? It all relates to how on the collapse of the American health and the worldwide health system. Okay? The metabolic mechanisms underlying these failures center on mitochondrial dysfunction and oxidative stress. Processed plant foods contain high levels of industrial seed oils rich in omega-6 linoleic acid. Excessive linoleic acid intake leads to increased oxidative stress by promoting the formation of reactive oxygen species and lipid peroxidation products like 4-hydroxynonenal. Okay? These oxidative products damage mitochondrial membranes, right? That's the membrane that makes up the mitochondria within your cell, particularly cardolipin, impairing mitochondrial electron transport and energy production, which is the whole basis of what the mitochondria is supposed to be there, is to help produce energy for the most part, right? Mitochondrial dysfunction reduces cellular energy availability, leading directly to insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. Okay? Simultaneously, high intake of refined carbohydrates, think cornflakes, right, and sugars, right, and think of all carbohydrates are essentially sugars, causes chronic elevation of blood glucose and insulin levels. Persistent hyperinsulinemia, that's having a high amount of insulin because you're eating so many carbohydrates, you're constantly pumping insulin into your system to try and handle the excess carbohydrates in your blood, leads to insulin receptor desensitization, reducing glucose uptake by muscle and fat cells while promoting fat storage and disrupting normal metabolic signaling. Research confirms these mechanisms in population studies. Plant-based foods high in refined grains, potatoes, and sugar-sweetened beverages show significant association with higher risk of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and hypertension. South Korean adults consuming diets high in less healthy plant foods had a 50% higher risk of developing metabolic syndrome. And just on a side note, if you go to the opposite, we have plenty of studies on people who eat a ketogenic carnivore diet who very quickly resolve their type 2 diabetes, their cardiovascular issues, cancer issues, obesity issues, their hunger, all gets resolved very quickly. Okay? So we have the evidence on that as well. Institutional resistance to reform. Why does this keep happening? Well, because guess what? There's no money in reforming it. The persistence of harmful dietary guidelines, despite mounting contradictory evidence, reveals the depth of the institutional capture. Many nutrition and health institutions rely heavily on government and industry funding that supports prevailing dietary guidelines and discourages dissent. Why does the government not want to fund dissenting functions? Well, because they've been telling us for years to eat lots of carbohydrates. If they start funding research that says don't eat carbohydrates, A, they have to tell you that they made a mistake 50, 60 years ago when they told you to eat all those carbohydrates, and B, all those politicians who keep pushing it aren't going to get reelected. Keep that in mind. Researchers and professionals risk losing funding, career opportunities, or professional standing when they challenge established dogma. Dietary guidelines are embedded in public health policy, education, and industry practices, making change slow and politically complex. Powerful lobbying by food and pharmaceutical industries further entrenches current policies. Even when independent researchers like Dr. Christopher Ramsden uncovered and reanalyzed raw data from suppressed trials, revealing increased mortality associated with seed oil consumption, major health organizations remain slow to update recommendations. This reflects ongoing institutional resistance rather than scientific uncertainty. The American Heart Association and government agencies continue promoting seed oils as part of their heart-healthy diets, relying on cholesterol-lowering narratives despite contradictory mortality data. Data from key trials were buried in obscure publications, preventing widespread awareness among clinicians and politicians. Okay? So let's break through this institutional control, and you can do it. Overcoming the systematic institutional failure requires both individual and empowerment and structural reform. Okay, it starts with individual empowerment. Individuals must learn to evaluate nutrition advice independently rather than accepting institutional guidance without question. Genuine evidence-based advice comes with clear expectations of biological mechanisms and transparent disclosure of funding sources and potential conflicts of interest. Reliable recommendations align with established knowledge of human physiology and metabolism. They avoid vague terms like healthy or superfood, which have no definition, okay, without scientific backing, and they acknowledge individual variability rather than promoting universal mandates. This is the era now of personalized health prescriptions, right? Or not prescriptions, of health guidance, right? Personalized health guidance. The quality and type of evidence matters critically. Randomized controlled trials and well-conducted mechanistic studies carry more weight than observational studies or cherry-picked data citations supporting preconceived notions. Reproducible findings across different populations and study designs provide stronger foundations for recommendations. Personal monitoring becomes essential when institutional guidance proves unreliable. Blood tests, metabolic health indicators, and subjective well-being assessments allow individuals to evaluate how dietary changes affect their specific physiology rather than following rigid adherence to dogmatic guidelines. Okay? There are broader implications for public health. And actually, I probably need a picture of RFK Jr. on here. Right? The systematic failures in nutrition science reveal vulnerabilities that extend far beyond dietary recommendations. Public health policies can be heavily influenced by ideological biases, commercial interests, and institutional inertia rather than purely objective science. Other areas, including pharmaceutical guidelines, vaccination policies, and chronic disease management, may be susceptible to similar conflicts of interest, selective evidence use, and suppression of dissenting data. When foundational fields like nutrition science are compromised, it undermines public confidence in health authorities and recommendations broadly. This erosion of trust creates dangerous skepticism towards legitimate medical interventions while simultaneously leaving people vulnerable to continued manipulation by captured institutions. Reform requires transparency and guideline development, including full disclosure of funding sources, conflicts of interest, and the complete scope of evidence, including negative or contradictory findings. Independent oversight bodies free from industry and ideological influence become crucial for unbiased policy development. And policies should be based on reproducible research. That's a big deal. You realize that the vast majority of nutritional research cannot be reproduced effectively. Okay? Which means it's not a valid research study, no matter what they say. Okay? The whole basis of science, if you learn this in chemistry, is the ability to reproduce the experiment. That way you know the experiment is good. Okay? It's really hard to do that with nutrition science. If not almost impossible. The scientific process must encourage openness to dissent, replication studies, and correction of errors, rather than protecting established dogma through institutional gatekeeping. But we have to really focus in on reclaiming the scientific integrity of nutrition science. The capture of nutrition science by religious ideology represents one of the most successful institution manipulations in modern history. A single organization transformed 19th century moral beliefs about sexual purity into 21st century medical recommendations that govern global dietary policy. They accomplished this through systematic institutional control, evidence suppression, and commercial integration spanning over a century. The health consequences are measurable and devastating. Populations following plant-based guidelines experienced increased rates of chronic diseases, metabolic dysfunction, and reproductive health problems. The promised benefits never materialized because the recommendations were never based on objective health outcomes. Understanding this institutional capture provides a framework for evaluating other areas of public health policy. When commercial interests align with ideological beliefs and institutional control, scientific integrity becomes secondary to maintaining established narratives. Individual empowerment through critical evaluation, personal monitoring, and biological plausibility assessment offers protection against continued institutional manipulation. Right? But systematic reform requires transparency, independent oversight, and fundamental restructuring of how public health policies are developed and maintained. The breakfast cereal in your pantry and the vegetable oil in your kitchen cabinet serve an agenda that predates modern medicine. Recognizing this reality represents the first step toward reclaiming both individual health and scientific integrity from institutional capture. The choice between institutional guidance and independent evaluation ultimately determines whether nutrition science serves human health or continues serving the ideological and commercial interests that captured it over a century ago. Thanks for watching, everybody. Couple quick things. If you have any comments or questions, please put them in the appropriate section. If this interests you, I am opening up on October 1st my group health program. It's $10 a month. It's not that much at all, and we provide a lot more personal instruction as well as much more in-depth discussion. So think about that. The links will be available on the description page. Okay, and as always, if you haven't done so, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with a friend. It helps the channel a great deal, so I'm going to thank you in advance for that, and you'll be helping a lot of other people. Have a great day.